Do you ever struggle with boundaries? Well, today's question is from somebody asking about setting boundaries with a family member and feeling the pressure. So if you can relate to that at all, welcome. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thanks so much for joining me. So as you know, if you've been following me for any length of time, people will send questions in and I will take an opportunity to share my response with you, because most of the questions that people have, I would say virtually 100%, are questions that other people have too. And a lot of people are afraid to ask their questions because they feel like they should have the answer or they shouldn't be struggling with it. So this series, Courageous Questions, is all about answering your questions so that you can hopefully get a response that feels helpful. And also it helps other people know that they're not alone. They're not crazy. They're not broken. It's not just them. So thank you, Krista, for sharing your question today. So Krista shared a little bit of background about her situation. And her mom hasn't been the best supportive mom, I guess we can say. She actually encouraged her to lie about her abuse, about the situation, didn't want people to know. So as a child, really encouraged her to be dishonest and lie about it, which of course is incredibly damaging on many levels. So she's now an adult and is struggling. How do I cope with the guilt of creating distance from a parent? I'm still in touch with my mom, but I don't see her often, and she's pushing for more contact. I'm not sure how to maintain the distance I need, and currently have other people in the family asking me why I don't call her or visit more often. I don't want to answer their questions, and I don't know how to keep putting off seeing her. I feel trapped and ashamed, and I'm not sure what to do. Can you relate? This is a huge issue to some degree for pretty much everybody I've ever known who has a history of abuse anyway. There are a lot of pieces to this, and there are a lot of factors that play into it that kind of keep me from being able to answer really specifically, because obviously I don't know all the details. And while I'm answering this for her, I'm also answering it for anybody else who has been through something similar. And so there are some pieces that I can speak to generally, but know that every situation is different. Every family dynamic is different. Where you're at in your healing is going to be different. So while what I'm sharing is hopefully relevant and helpful, there are some things that are important for you to consider for your own individual situation. So one of the first things that I want to address, and I think in some ways that this is kind of one of the most important things, is she ended by saying, feeling trapped and ashamed. So there is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing. Whether that's what led you to this place, what happened to you, how she responded, or the struggle that you have with boundaries or anything else, there is nothing to be ashamed of. This is an incredibly difficult situation to be in many ways, kind of an impossible situation to be in. So, first and foremost, there is nothing to be ashamed of. Because if we start from that place of feeling shame and unworthiness go together. If you believe that you're unworthy of setting this boundary, then it's going to be incredibly difficult to honor that. So nothing to be ashamed of at all. The pressure. This is a hard one. And this is often one of the things that can be the most, or create the most significant struggle. Because a lot of people can get to a point where they feel confident in honoring what they want and say, okay, I know this isn't good for me. I know that it's okay to do this. I know it's best for my healing. And can even somewhat deal with any pressure they may feel from that particular person. But when other people start chiming in, especially when those people are unaware of that dynamic or are completely unsupportive of it and basically tell you to get over it, but especially if they don't know, it's incredibly challenging because you're experiencing that pressure as if they do know, as if they know how you're struggling and the reality of the circumstance. And so when they're saying, why aren't you talking to her? You should talk to her. You only have one mom, and all those kinds of things. You experience it, you take it in as if they're telling you that what happened to you, how she responded to you, how you feel, doesn't really matter. And we take that as evidence that we don't matter, that other people's feelings are more important. So if they don't know the circumstances, then they don't know what the reasons are. And not that you know that you owe an explanation to anybody, because you really don't. But it's important to just keep that in mind. So when you're feeling that pressure, you can say to yourself, they don't get it. They don't understand. And so the fact that they're pressuring me has nothing to do with my decision or me or the reality of the circumstance. They're pressuring me because they don't understand why I wouldn't be communicating with her or wouldn't want to be around her. So if it's somebody that does know, then you just have to remind yourself that they don't get it. They still don't get it. And they're pressuring you is because they don't want to deal with the discomfort. They don't want to have to face any reality. And that's not a judgment specifically about that or them. That's just the reality. Because anybody who really understands is not going to pressure you to see somebody, especially somebody that denied your reality or made you try to lie about it or tried to make you lie about it. So if we can keep those things in mind as we're feeling that guilt around setting the boundary, then it can lessen the intensity of that feeling, of the guilt, of the doubt, whether it's okay to do it, feeling bad about doing it, maybe even feeling ashamed of doing it. If we can keep those things in mind, it can help kind of mitigate some of that a little bit. So, in regards to this, I also want to say, good for you for being able to recognize that this isn't good for you. And that's creating space and distance, not seeing her, not talking to her as often. Good for you for recognizing that that's what you need, especially as you're healing. And taking steps to honor that for yourself. That is not an easy thing to do by itself, let alone all those other pieces that were mentioned here. Just making that decision is incredibly challenging. So there's a lot there for you to feel good about. So, what do you then do specifically, aside from how to kind of mitigate the intensity of some of that feeling and doubt and all of that? So again, this is going to kind of depend on your circumstance, the nature of your relationship with these people. But so when it comes to the person themselves that you're trying to create space with, I mean, ideally, you would be able to say why. But let's be real. Anybody working on trying to set this kind of boundary is not in an ideal situation. So it's not going to happen. Now, the reason I even said it in an ideal situation is that the more that you heal, the more likely you'll be able to get to a place where you actually might be able to do something like this when you're trying to set boundaries in the future. Or if you need to continue to set boundaries with people that you're trying to set them with now. So if you don't feel ready to actually say why you're trying to create this space, first of all, don't beat yourself up about that. And again, there's nothing to be ashamed of. It's hard. So while I don't think that dishonesty is really generally a good thing, because it can bring up all kinds of things, and you've likely been living a lie, like keeping the secret and not being honest about how you feel about things and stuff like that. So I generally try to encourage people to be really honest and open about how they feel. But when it comes to setting boundaries, there are times when I think it is okay to ease into it by making excuses. And again, it's not ideal, and generally it's not something that I would encourage somebody to do. But when it does come to setting boundaries, you have to take baby steps. And sometimes you might just ignore the call or the text. You might say that you've got plans. You can come up with an excuse to help minimize the fear that can come up when you think about actually being honest about why you're trying to set that boundary. So if you come up with an excuse, or even if you're honest, and that person is just not accepting that, you don't owe them anymore. You don't. I know it can feel hard to really trust that that could be true, but you don't. You can just say, no, I'm not available, or that doesn't work for me, or that time isn't good, or I'm not sure, I'll get back to you. Like, you can say those things. And again, if you want to come up with something like, I have plans, I'll connect with you later, you can do that. Again, I just want to say this, it's not ideal, but as you're working towards feeling more confident in your ability to set boundaries, it can be a way to ease into that a little bit. When it comes to the people that are pressuring you, and there was a situation in my personal life where somebody didn't really understand my desire not to be around my brother. And he would make comments and, he loves you and I don't know why you don't want to talk to him or see him or whatever. It was really challenging. And I struggled with it. I was never really honest about it. I don't even remember how I would respond to it at this point, but because it was a long time ago, but it's not an easy situation to be in. So when it comes to other people, you could say something along the lines of, I know that you don't understand, but there are some things that we're trying to work out and it's between me and her. Or I appreciate your concern and I understand, but I'm not ready yet. Something along that line is perfectly okay to say something like that and just leave it there. You don't owe them more than that. You don't. And really, you don't even owe them that. But I know that that's easier said than done. And if they keep coming to you and trying to get you to change your mind, then you can choose to set a boundary with that person and say, look, I know that you don't get it. I know that you care. I know that you don't want her to be hurting, but hopefully you don't want me to be hurting either. You could throw that in there, but I know it's hard to do that. But you could say then, I know that you don't get it, but it's really important to me that you give me space. And bringing it up all the time is not helping. And then if that person continues to do that, maybe you limit the time that you spend speaking with them. And I know that this is incredibly challenging because the reality is that for a lot of families, if you really cut people out of your life who do not honor and respect your boundaries, I know many of you, you basically don't have any family left. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have support on this healing journey. Because this is not easy. This issue alone, trying to set boundaries, there's recognizing what you need, there's honoring what you need, there's setting the boundary, there's enforcing the boundary, and there's dealing with all that stuff that comes up as a result. It's incredibly difficult to try to do all of that, especially with those relationships that are really significant in your life. It's incredibly difficult to do that on your own. And people think that once you just make that decision, then that's the hard part, and then it's easy from there. Well, it is hard to get there. There's no doubt about that. But it's definitely not the hardest part, because the real guilt, the challenge to that guilt, the challenge to you trying to honor yourself comes in expressing those boundaries or enforcing those boundaries. There's a lot of challenge there, even internally, even if it's not from other people. So know that trying to set these boundaries is incredibly challenging. It's going to be difficult. There's nothing easy about it. Also know that having support as you do that really is important, and you deserve to have that support. You deserve to have somebody in your corner who gets it, who is able to remind you that you're not doing anything wrong and that what you're doing is actually healthy. And as you heal, it all gets easier. It does. I don't know that I would say that it ever gets to a point where it's completely easy, especially with those people that are closest to you, but you don't have the degree of guilt. That intensity of guilt or fear is not nearly as intense as it is now the further along on your healing journey you get. You're still going to struggle likely, but you won't have that intensity of feeling come up. So I hope that that feels helpful. Again, I know that it would be nice if I could just say, okay, this is what you need to do, and this is how to do it, and feel good about it, and not struggle at all. I wish that that were possible. But the reason that we struggle with boundaries is because it is so hard. There's so much that it brings up. So having support is really good. Reminding yourself that what you're doing is healthy. And if you're trying to heal, being able to do those healthy things is imperative. And also keeping in mind, so that you don't judge yourself, that even when you've made that decision, and even if you have support, enforcing those boundaries is not easy. And you might not be able to enforce those boundaries initially. Or maybe you do pretty well for a period of time, and then because you're feeling really vulnerable, or they just, keep pounding on that door, so to speak, you give in. That's likely going to happen at times as well. Doesn't mean you failed. Doesn't mean you're starting over. That is part of the process of being able to set and enforce boundaries. So I'd love to hear from you. Can you relate to this? Have you struggled with this? It's not easy. So just know that you're not alone. If you've been struggling with trying to set boundaries, or even recognizing what your boundaries are, what you want, what you need, I do have a course called Sacred Boundaries that you might find beneficial. It's self-paced, so you do it on your own. There are different things in there, different practices to work on. There's some recorded Q&As with some really great questions in there. a workbook. So lots of information in there, and it is designed for you to be able to come back to time and time again when you need a reminder of something, or when you're struggling with something in particular. You can go back into it and be reminded of what you might need to be reminded of. So I will share a link in the description for that as well. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, you can send it to qanda@courageousjourneys.com. Of course, if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up so other people can find it too. And if you've not yet subscribed, make sure to do so and click the little bell for notifications. Thanks so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you next time.